another story coming right up. And you can always learn more about Theodore Tugboat on the internet. Find us through PBS Online.
Pushing and a pulling in the great big harbor, in the great big world is so much fun. So many brand new things to discover. Waking with the sun, gotta get the job done. Oh, Theodore and Emily, Boduck, Hank and George, and the harbor master too.
Hello. I'm almost finished putting together this model ship. There. It's like the one I learned to sail on when I was a boy. The wind would blow, and I had to learn to use the sails to make her go where I wanted. It wasn't that easy. And sometimes, when I wasn't careful, the wind would blow her right over. For a while, none of my friends wanted to sail with me. You know, something like that happened to our friend Hank just the other day. Oh, well, that's when he became a tug in charge for the first time.
The tugs were gathered at the Great Ocean Dock for a special ceremony.
And I promise to be friendly to all who enter the big harbor,
said Hank. Hank was just finishing reciting the tugboat pledge.
Now that you have completed all your training, said the dispatcher, you are now ready to be an official tug in charge. Hank, please float forward.
Hank smiled his happiest smile. This was the day he'd been waiting for. Finally, he was allowed to move ships all by himself, just like the other tugboats.
Tugboats, called Boduck, sound off.
The tugboats all whistled to say, "Congratulations, Hank."
Here comes the new tug in charge,
Hank announced to the harbor. Hank turned to hurry off, but he couldn't seem to move.
Hank, Theodore whispered, you better tuck in your anchor first.
Sure enough, Hank's dangling anchor was firmly hooked to a dock bumper. The other tugs grinned too. Hank was a little excited today. Later that morning, Hank and Theodore were floating through the harbor together.
Theodore, do I look bigger?
Said Hank.
Maybe a little,
Theodore replied. Hank's engine was drumming, ga-thumpa, 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 inside his hull.
I can't wait for my first tug-in-charge job,
he smiled. Just then, they heard a familiar whistle. Right away, they knew it belonged to Digby, the little cable ship, and they also knew what it meant. Digby was stuck, again.
You better go get Digby unstuck,
Hank said to Theodore.
Hank,
said Theodore, you're a tug-in-charge. You can do it.
Well, yes, I am,
Hank said slowly.
And yes, I can.
Theodore never saw Hank move so fast in his life. Sure enough, Hank found Digby, stuck on Willie's Island. Now, this wasn't too strange, you see. Digby was always getting stuck somewhere.
I was just floating along, minding my own barnacles,
explained Digby,
when this here island jumped out and got stuck on me. Don't worry, Digby,
called Hank.
I'll get you out of there. Hey, where's Theodore?
Asked Digby. Oh, he said I should help you this time, answered Hank.
Are you qualified for this particular job, Hank?
Digby said uncertainly.
Oh, sure,
smiled Hank. I'm an official tug in charge now.
Well, knock me down with a sea slug, said Digby. That is superior, Hank. Superior. You may proceed at getting me unstuck.
Hank quickly buttoned his tow rope onto Digby and began to pull.
Now, be careful,
said Digby.
I got a sensitive bottom on me.
Just then, Rebecca, the research vessel, cruised past on her way out of the harbor.
Hey, Rebecca,
honked Hank.
Look at me. I'm a tug in charge now.
Hank was so excited that he wasn't paying attention. He gave Digby an extra yank. The next thing Digby knew, he slid into the rocks.
Ouch,
he cried.
Jumping jellyfish. Mind me jibbity-spiggity jipping joists. What did you say, Digby?
Said Hank, turning back to him. Hank didn't know that Digby had scraped his hull on the rocks.
Nothing,
mumbled Digby, who was too upset to say all that again. Hank pulled Digby the rest of the way off Willie's Island, and the cable ship slipped back into the water. Safe, but sore.
There you go, Digby, beamed Hank. Anytime you need to get unstuck, just call me. That's what a tug in charge is for.
And with that, Hank puffed off, smiling happily. But Digby didn't look too happy.
That'll be the last time I let Hank help me, he said to himself. That hurt.
The next morning, Theodore was moving Brunswick barge. Hank came cruising past.
Tug in charge, Hank, on the job,
He hooted. Digby was laying some cable along the shore nearby. Theodore noticed something strange. As Hank hurried by, Digby suddenly backed up into a small cove.
Well, that's funny, said Theodore. Digby looks like he's hiding.
That afternoon, Theodore was on his way to take a ship out of the harbor. Once again, Theodore saw Hank.
Tug in charge, Hank, still on the job,
Called Hank,
if anyone needs me.
and Digby saw him too. This time the cable ship slid quickly in beside the ship, out of sight. Hank continued on his cruise around the harbor. When he was safely away in the distance, Digby moved off. That's really strange, Theodore said out loud. This time he was sure Digby was hiding. But from who? Theodore moved into place to button his tow rope onto the ship. Oh, Theodore, said the ship, you're moving me today. Great.
Well, thank you.
Said Theodore. Anyone but Hank, added the ship.
Well, why don't you want Hank to move you?
Theodore wanted to know. Oh, you can't trust Hank, replied the ship. Well, now Theodore was really puzzled. But Hank's my friend, he said. Of course you can trust him. Not to move ships, said the ship. Everyone says so. But he's only ever moved Digby before, Theodore said slowly. Digby, Theodore repeated to himself. I wonder. After Theodore had taken the ship out of the harbor, he found Digby. Digby looked startled when he heard Theodore's whistle. But this time, he didn't try to hide.
Oh, Theodore, he said. It's only you. So, how did it go with Hank yesterday?
Said Theodore.
Theodore,
Digby replied, taking a deep breath.
I don't know if you've ever noticed this before, but I am a mite tiny wee bit once-in-a-blue-moon kind of thing, prone to getting, stuck.
I have noticed, grinned Theodore.
And to make a long story short, Theodore,
Digby went on.
when Hank tried to get me unstuck, he wasn't exactly paying attention.
I see, said Theodore.
He scraped me really good,
Concluded Digby.
so now I don't trust Hank to move me.
Theodore caught up to Hank, heading home through the harbor.
Hi, Theodore,
Called Hank.
I'm all finished work already. Being a tug in charge is easy.
Hank, said Theodore, did you actually do anything today?
Well,
Admitted Hank.
no one seemed to need me.
Digby says you scraped him yesterday, Theodore continued. I did, said Hank, surprised. And now, no one wants you to move them, said Theodore.
But why not?
Hank wanted to know.
I am a tug in charge, just like you are.
I guess, Theodore said, when I move ships, I'm really careful.
And I'm not.
Hank said sadly.
Being a tug in charge is impossible.
Just then, the tugs heard a sharp whistle, and Petra the pilot boat cruised by. Theodore, called Petra, a ship is waiting to be brought in. On my way, tooted Theodore. Hank, said Theodore, why don't you come with me?
Okay.
Theodore and Hank met the cargo ship at the harbor entrance. Hank will be your tug in charge, Theodore announced to the ship. Me? Hank said, surprised. I'd rather have you bring me in, Theodore, the ship said nervously.
Hank will do a very good job, smiled Theodore. He'll be very careful, right, Hank?
Right, Hank agreed. I hope, he added. The ship, whose name was Kingston, didn't look so sure about Hank moving him.
I'll stay right here with you, Theodore told him, and watch you get started.
Well, Kingston said slowly, if you say it's okay, Theodore. Hank buttoned his tow rope onto Kingston and carefully began to move him into the harbor. Every eye in the harbor seemed to be on Hank to see how he did. Would he have an accident with this ship, too?
I'll see you after you're finished,
Theodore called to Hank, beginning to head off.
You can do it, Hank.
He added softly. As Hank kept moving Kingston through the harbor, he was as careful as can be. He didn't want any scrapes this time. Soon, they had reached Clayton, the harbor crane's dock. Now all Hank had to do was dock Kingston. Hank was just beginning to breathe a little easier, and suddenly, a loud rumble shook the dock. Clayton came clattering along on his giant track.
Hey, Hank, is that you?
Clayton shouted.
Are you a tug in charge now?
Hank was about to shout out,
Yes, I am a tug in charge.
but he stopped himself.
Clayton,
He called quietly.
I really can't talk now. I have to dock the ship.
And without another word,
That is exactly what Hank did.
Hank slid Kingston into his dock and stopped right in front of Clayton, ready to be unloaded.
That was the smoothest docking I've ever had.
Said Kingston with a big smile in his voice.
Look pretty good from up here, too.
Called Clayton.
Thanks.
Smiled Hank. A little later, Hank was heading home to his own dock when he heard Theodore's whistle.
How did it go?
Theodore wanted to know.
Theodore,
Smiled Hank.
I think I'm going to be a good tug in charge. You know something, Hank?
Said Theodore.
What's that, Theodore?
Said Hank.
You already are a good tug in charge.
Smiled Theodore.
You know, I think Hank will make a terrific tug in charge. Don't you? I mean, he's extra careful now, just like I had to learn to be when I first started sailing. And pretty soon, everyone wanted to go sailing with me. Thanks for visiting us here in the Big Harbor. And we'll see you all again next time. I think I'll put my new model ship right here. I'll just set her very gently down on a stand, like that. Looks pretty good, don't you think? Sailing, sailing over the bounding main.